The candles above the ballroom quivered with each gust from the passing footmen, their flames flickering like secrets in the air. Lady Amelini's laughter, too high for sincerity, lilted across the marble floor as violins whispered a waltz no one truly danced for love. Glass clinked, fans fluttered, and beneath the grandeur of silk and champagne, no one noticed a girl in gray linen who moved with the elegance of someone trained to disappear. Her name was Clara Hollow, 22 years of age, unremarkable by society standards, and in her 4th year serving as a parlor maid at Hawthorne Hall. Her hands bore the softened calluses of polishing silver and arranging flowers, and her eyes, when caught in rare light, held the calm of someone who had seen too much to hope loudly. She was neither beautiful nor bold, at least not in ways that mattered to the assembled nobility. Her presence, like the ticking of the great clock in the entrance hall, was constant but unheeded. Yet tonight, as the house filled with lace and lords, something had shifted, not in Clara, but around her. The Gala, thrown in honor of the Duke of Merrow's return from the continent, had turned Hawthorne Hall into a theater of ambition. Petty viscountesses smiled too wide, and young ladies with dowries braided into their very hair waited near the refreshment table, laughing at things not meant to be funny. And the Duke, ever stoic and silent, moved through them like a shadow made flesh, tall, unsmiling, and robed in black as if mourning something unseen. Clara had dusted the very books he now passed by in the library corridor, and once found an open volume there, Ovid's Tristia, with a pressed bluebell inside. She had never spoken a word to the Duke, nor he to her, though she had once caught him looking, not at her face, but at her wrist, where a wine stain had ruined the cuff of her apron. No one at the Gala spoke to Clara. They never did. The other maids bustled with trays. The butler offered quiet commands, and Clara moved between the ballroom and drawing room, unnoticed but entirely exposed, until he asked her to stay. It was as the final guests were leaving, the perfume of their presence lingering like something overripe. Clara had just finished collecting empty crystal flutes when the voice, low, deliberate, sounded behind her. "Miss Hollow, stay a moment." She froze. The footman beside her blinked. Had he imagined it? Clara turned slowly, sure she had misheard. But there stood the Duke himself, one gloved hand resting on the polished rail of the grand staircase, his gaze not quite on her face, but not dismissing her either. She curtsied, instinctively. "Your Grace, I would speak with you, in the conservatory. 5 minutes' time." He did not wait for a reply. He walked away, and Clara's hands, still holding a tray of half-finished champagne, trembled, but only slightly, because something had broken open in the air. A question no one had asked, an order no one else heard. And as the grandfather clock in the entrance hall struck midnight, the servants glanced at one another. No one said it aloud, but they all felt it. Something had begun. The conservatory at Hawthorne Hall was a world apart from the noise of the Gala. Glass-paneled walls curved into a domed ceiling, moonlight filtered through leaves slick with condensation, and the air smelled faintly of citrus and earth. It was where no titled lady lingered too long, lest the heat frizz her curls, or where secret assignations bloomed behind drawn ferns. But Clara had only entered at dawn to water the orchids, never by command and never under the eye of a duke. She did not enter immediately. She waited 5 minutes, as instructed, then waited one more, tray now abandoned, heart strangely steady. When she stepped inside, the door whispered shut behind her. The Duke stood with his back to her, one hand resting against the glass. He did not turn at first. Clara kept to the edge of the room, unsure of the rules in a moment that had none. "You have worked here 4 years," he said, without preamble. "Yes, Your Grace," she replied, her voice low and even. "You do not speak unless spoken to." "No, Your Grace." He finally turned then, and his eyes found hers, not grazing over, not skimming, but holding. They were not the icy blue the drawing-room whispers claimed. They were gray, like winter morning fog. "You placed violets in my mother's rooms last spring." "Why?" The question struck like a snapped branch. Quiet, sudden, impossible to ignore. Clara blinked. She once said that she missed the smell of her garden in April. I remembered. His mouth did not move. His expression held. "She died in June." Clara lowered her gaze. I know. There was a silence thick enough to hang from. He did not feel it. When he finally stepped closer, his boots made no sound on the tile. You are not like the others. She said nothing. He looked at her apron, at the same wrist he had glanced at before. What is your name? She almost smiled but didn't. Clara, your grace. Clara. He said it once, as if testing it for weight. Then, again but quieter, Clara Hollow. The name hung between them, full of space and consequence. But then a sound, heels against stone, cut the moment in two. Lady Agatha Pembroke entered without knocking, her skirts rustling with purpose and her chin tilted, an angle born from generations of breeding and calculation. She paused only briefly when she saw Clara, then turned a practiced smile on the Duke. There you are, Marrow. Everyone is saying goodbyes, and you vanished. How mysterious of you. The Duke did not step back. He did not explain. His eyes remained on Clara. Lady Agatha's smile faltered by a hair's breadth. Clara dipped her head and moved to leave, but the Duke raised a hand slightly. Just enough. Stay. It was not a request. It was not addressed to Lady Agatha. It was Clara he wished to remain. Agatha's jaw tightened. Oh, I wasn't aware the help joined private conversations now. The Duke turned then, finally giving Agatha his full attention, but with a coldness that made the humid air seem brittle. Perhaps you should be... It was not loud, but it was loud enough. Lady Agatha's face did not change, not in any way that could be remarked upon later. But the stiffness in her shoulders, the sudden tension in her hands, those things spoke for her. She gave a brittle laugh. I'll find my own way out then. And she left, uncurtsied, unkissed, unanswered. Clara did not move. Neither did he. Outside, the carriages began to roll away into the July night, wheels crunching gravel and lords murmuring drunken farewells. But inside the conservatory, with dew beating on glass and the scent of orange blossoms closing in, Clara stood in a dress meant to be forgotten and felt the air thicken around her. The Duke said nothing more, but he looked at her like something had changed. Not just tonight, perhaps long before, but now, finally, he was ready to speak of it. Clara Hollow had never dreamed of nobility, not in the fanciful, candlelit sense the other maids sometimes whispered about when the night was soft and the work was done. Her world had not allowed for dreams that looked upward. Her mother had scrubbed floors until her bones bent, and her father, an under-gardener who died when Clara was 9, had left behind nothing but a spade, a pair of cracked boots, and a copy of Aesop's fables with her name penciled on the flyleaf. There was no lineage, no dowry, no name to protect her, just service. She came to Hawthorne Hall at 18. Hired by the housekeeper for her quiet nature and strong back, Clara had arrived on a frostbitten morning, boots too large, fingers chapped, and voice trained to silence. But she listened. That was her gift, not just to orders, but to everything. The way Lady Marrow sighed at dusk, the flicker of the Duke's candle at midnight, the precise moment when Lord Hawthorne began coughing in March. She carried the rhythm of the house inside her and became part of its pulse. There had been kindness once. Early on, the Duchess, Lady Helena Marrow, had noticed her, noticed and remembered. When Clara brought warm towels to her chamber or arranged lemon cakes on the silver tray, the Duchess would nod, sometimes even smile. Once, when Clara spilled tea and fell to her knees in shame, it was the Duchess who touched her shoulder and said gently, "Rise, child. The floor has survived worse." It was Lady Helena who first asked her name, and it was Lady Helena who first told her to arrange flowers in the guest rooms. "With your hands, Miss Hollow, not just your eyes. You have a sensibility." Clara never forgot that, but the Duchess grew ill, slowly at first, then swiftly. That final spring, Clara placed violets in her chamber every morning, quiet, loyal tributes. No one noticed, not even the other maids, except perhaps the Duke. There had been a moment, nearly forgotten, now returning like a half-remembered dream. 3 weeks before Lady Helena's death. Clara had come early to the library to polish the banister when she heard a low voice reading aloud, Latin, slow and even. She peeked in and saw the Duke, seated beside his mother, reading from a small leather volume. The Duchess's hand lay over his, thin and shaking. When Clara made to slip away, a book slid from the shelf above her. The noise was small, but enough. The Duke looked up. Their eyes met. He said nothing, but he had seen her. After the funeral, the house changed. The laughter vanished. The walls darkened. The Duke took to traveling France, Belgium, Italy. Rumors said he had returned only for duty, to host a gala, to consider marriage, to re-establish ties. Clara had not expected him to remember anything about her. Why would he? Yet last winter, something odd occurred. She found a book, Ovid's Tristia, left open on a library desk. No one but the Duke used the room. Inside, between pages speaking of exile and longing, lay a single pressed bluebell. Fresh, deliberate. She said nothing. She never would have dared. But the next morning, she left one on the windowsill. A bluebell in reply, and it vanished before the hour struck 10. There were no words exchanged, no promises, just that silent exchange of flowers across weeks, a language unspoken. And now, months later, he had spoken to her, asked for her, told her to stay, not as a servant, not as a girl to be ignored, but as someone whose name he had remembered, whose hands he had seen, whose silence had never gone unnoticed. Clara Hollow had no title, no claim, no future beyond polished staircases and empty rooms. But she had once been kind when no one else was watching, and somehow, impossibly, that kindness had taken root. Now it had bloomed into something far more dangerous. The morning after the gala, rain tapped gently on the windows of Hawthorne Hall, soft as a breath. Servants moved quietly through the corridors, clearing remnants of celebration. Crushed roses in the entryway, forgotten gloves beside the banister, a champagne flute resting on the edge of a windowsill, as if someone had meant to return for it, but never did. Clara Hollow did not take breakfast in the servants' hall that morning, nor did she join the other maids in relaying gossip over the coals in the scullery, where speculation now bloomed like mold between the bricks. Instead, she moved with measured silence to the eastern wing, where the housekeeper had sent her to clean the Duchess's old rooms, and used since the funeral, preserved in time like a whisper never finished. She had asked for this assignment weeks ago. At the time, the request was passed over as mere sentimentality. The girl always had a fondness for her grace, they'd said, but it had not been sentiment. Not entirely. There, beneath the creaking beams and faded damask curtains, Clara opened a hidden drawer in the writing desk. Inside was a bundle of letters tied with blue ribbon, letters the Duchess had written in her final months, some to old friends, others never addressed, all unsent. Among them, one bore a seal unbroken. It was marked with a single word in the Duchess's own hand. Marrow. Clara had known it was there. She had dusted the desk often enough to see the faint lines of the hidden compartment, and once, while polishing, had seen the corner of the ribbon peeking through. She never opened it while the Duchess was alive. She never touched it after she died. But last week, before the gala, Clara had returned to the room and taken the letter. She did not read it. She had no right, but she kept it with her, sealed, wrapped carefully in linen, and tucked into her apron pocket each day since, because something told her it mattered. And now, after the Duke's summons, she knew it more than ever. Later that day, when the rain had faded and a sliver of sunlight touched the library floor, Clara crossed paths with Mr. Alden, the Duke's solicitor, just arrived by carriage. A tall, sharp-featured man, with the air of someone who kept secrets in leather-bound folders. Mr. Alden had known Clara since her first week in service. He rarely spoke more than was required. But that afternoon, as Clara passed him in the gallery with a silver tray of tea for the drawing-room, he paused. He looked at her, not as a servant, but with something akin to recognition. He nodded once, subtly, and Clara, with the calm of a storm waiting offshore, nodded back. In the south wing, meanwhile, another quiet movement unfolded. Mrs. Fenwick, the oldest of the housemaids and nearly blind in one eye, sat in her corner room carefully stitching something into the hem of Clara's second-best dress. No one knew, No one would. Clara had brought it to her that morning with a simple request. Could you hide a letter here? Securely. Mrs. Fenwick had not asked questions. She had merely taken the dress and said, "You'll have to wear it soon, then, before someone else does." Outside, the guests from the gala were still sending notes of thanks and social inquiries. The Duke had not yet emerged from his private quarters. Lady Agatha had left with sharp-edged farewell, her smile brittle as a frostbitten rose. And in the kitchen, the footmen whispered about what had happened in the conservatory, each with a version more scandalous than the last. Clara said nothing, but as she folded linen beside the hearth, her fingers brushed the sealed letter tucked beneath her apron. A letter written by a dying duchess. A letter never sent. A letter she now intended to deliver. And someone, somewhere, had begun watching her more closely. For as Clara passed the staircase on her way to the guest corridor, a shadow paused just beyond the landing. A man stood there. The Duke. He said nothing, but he watched her go. And for the first time in her years at Hawthorne Hall, Clara did not lower her eyes. The drawing room was unusually full that afternoon, though no invitation had been issued. It began as a casual gathering. Lady Agatha Pembroke had returned unannounced, claiming she left her bracelet behind, though her fingers bore no gap where it might have rested. Beside her sat Sir Julian Brent, his boots muddy from the morning ride, and Lady Horatia with her usual air of discontent, fiddling with the clasp of her fan as though it personally offended her. The Duke had not emerged since the night of the gala. That alone had sparked more rumor than the spilled wine and strained smiles. But when he entered the room that day, the hum of conversation stilled. He wore no cravat. His coat was buttoned high, and his gloves remained on his hands. "Ladies, Sir Julian." His voice was crisp but colder than usual. "Thank you for assembling. I believe you'll find this gathering instructive." Lady Agatha lifted a brow. "We weren't summoned, Your Grace. Perhaps not by invitation, but certainly by design." And with that, he turned, not to a guest, not to a solicitor, but to Clara. She stood just inside the drawing-room doorway, hands folded at her apron, chin high. The housekeeper had sent her with tea, not knowing what had been arranged, and now the silver tray rested on a nearby table. Forgotten, irrelevant. Clara stepped forward. In her hand, she held a letter. Not the copy. Not the one sewn into the hem of her dress. The original, unbroken seal, blue ribbon. It bore the unmistakable handwriting of the late Duchess of Marrow. A ripple went through the room like the first crack of thunder. The Duke extended his hand, and Clara gave it to him without a word. Mr. Alden, who had been standing by the fireplace like a portrait that might shift at any moment, nodded to the Duke. "Shall I read it aloud, Your Grace?" The Duke hesitated. Then, softly, "No, I shall." He opened the seal with delicate precision, his gloved fingers steady. His eyes scanned the page quickly at first, then slowly, line by line. When he began to speak, his voice was not the voice they had always known. It was the voice of a son. "To my dearest son, Edward, Duke of Marrow, if you are reading this, then I am gone from this world, and there are things I must say that I could not when breath remained in me." Silence enveloped the room. The Duchess's letter unfolded not as a farewell, but as a confession. She wrote of her regret, not for her own actions, but for her silence. She named a child. A girl bore a kindness and solitude during a long winter of her husband's absences. Not an affair, but protection, an act of quiet rebellion against the cold order of marriage. A child she had helped into the world through another woman's arms. She named the girl Clara Hollow. There was a gasp from Lady Horatia, a muttered, "Impossible," from Sir Julian, but no one moved. She was not born in sin, but in sorrow. The letter read, "And I loved her as I loved you, differently, but deeply. I entrusted her into the care of a servant I knew I could rely upon, and I ensured she was placed where I could watch over her, even if from a distance. I chose her name, Edward. Hollow, yes, but filled with everything I could never give her openly." The Duke's hands trembled slightly, but he continued, "You may choose to deny her. The law will protect your name. But I beg you, do not deny her humanity. When the letter ended, he looked up, directly at Clara. No one else breathed. Then Lady Agatha, sharp, bright, burning with fury, rose from her chair with a clap of her fan. "This is a fabrication," she snapped. "A servant? A child of what? Scandal? This is theater. Edward. Grief. Nonsense." But she did not sound sure, because the seal had been real, and the Duchess's hand unmistakable. Sir Julian cleared his throat. "You're not seriously entertaining this, Marrow." But the Duke did not answer him. Instead, he turned to Clara, and for the second time in her life, he said her name aloud, not as a whisper or a memory, but as truth. Clara Hollow. She met his gaze. Daughter of Hawthorne Hall. And the room cracked in half. It began with denial. As swiftly as the letter's final words dissolved into still air, the drawing-room surged with the defense mechanisms of the aristocracy, doubt, disbelief, and strategic cruelty. Lady Agatha stepped forward, her fan now trembling in her white-gloved hand. She is lying, or someone has manipulated her into believing she's important. This girl, this maid, you cannot be serious, Edward. She no longer called him Your Grace. Sir Julian chimed in, ever the loyal suitor to status. A letter is not a birthright. Anyone could have forged a hand. You know as well as I that women in mourning often grew fanciful, and the Duchess was unwell in her final days. She was lucid, the Duke replied, his voice sharp and low, more dangerous for its restraint. This letter was found in her private desk, hidden in a locked compartment only she used. The seal is hers. The script is hers. And Mr. Alden, he gestured to the solicitor now holding a matching parchment, has corroborated the handwriting against her will and correspondence. All eyes turned to Alden. The solicitor, unshaken, gave a single nod. It is authentic, and it was left deliberately. Lady Horatia sat, her complexion gone sallow. But what does it mean truly? A fondness? A misplaced maternal instinct? Nothing legal. She is a maid. This cannot be permitted to alter inheritance or name. You have no proof of blood. There is no need for blood, the Duke said calmly. There is truth. The air in the room turned brittle. Lady Agatha, eyes glinting, stepped closer to Clara. Too close. Did you plan this? From the moment you entered this house, were you scheming? She hissed. Did you hope to climb your way out of the kitchens with a story and a smile? Clara did not flinch. Her voice, when it came, was neither soft nor loud, but terribly still. I never asked to be seen, only not to be erased. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Agatha's face twitched. She must go. At once. Out of the house. Out of the charade. But the Duke raised a hand, not to strike, but to stop the tide. She will remain. On what grounds? Horatia asked, aghast. On mine. Then he walked to Clara, as calmly as if through a garden, and stood beside her. Not before her, not behind her, but beside. She is not my sister by law. I make no legal claim on her blood, but she was my mother's child in spirit, and as Duke of Marrow, I claim responsibility for her protection. You are ruining yourself, Lady Agatha breathed, more to herself than to him. You've destroyed your own standing. He turned to her, expression colder than glass. Standing with whom? The sort who measure worth in bloodlines and cruelty. And then, without raising his voice, without a single tremor of hesitation, he dismissed them. All of you leave. They did not move. Now. And like frightened birds, they scattered. Only Mr. Alden remained, folding the letter with care and placing it into a black folio. I will see to the formalities, he murmured to the Duke. Then, bowing slightly to Clara, Miss Hollow, she blinked at the title, and Alden left. The room emptied like a receding tide. Clara stood unmoving. The Duke did not speak. He did not ask forgiveness. He simply offered her the quiet of the drawing room and his place beside her. There was no triumph in it, only a slow, echoing shift, as if the house itself had turned to listen. The aftermath struck not with fury, but with stillness. The grand drawing room, once echoing with embroidered cruelty and the rustle of silk, now lay in quiet disarray. chairs angled in departure, a dropped glove abandoned, the scent of rose water thick in the air. The air felt bruised, as if the room had inhaled too deeply and forgotten how to exhale. Clara did not move. The Duke remained beside her for a moment longer, then turned and left without a word, leaving her, astonishingly, alone in a room where her name had been spoken aloud for the first time as more than a servant, more than a background. She walked slowly to the fireplace and touched the mantle's carved edge. The stone was cold beneath her fingertips. The room, once a cage of whispered judgments, now felt suspended between one life and the next. The corridors outside buzzed with nervous movement. Footsteps, whispers, doors opening and closing too quickly. In the servants' quarters below, chaos unfolded. "Did you hear what she said?" one maid breathed. "She's not just a maid. She's her daughter. The Duchess's. The Duke's gone mad. Or worse, fallen under a spell." "No," whispered the old cook, her ladle resting still in the pot. "He's finally seen what the rest of you missed." Back upstairs, Lady Agatha collapsed into her guest chamber, fury disguised as composure. She ripped off her gloves, leaving faint red lines along her wrists, and called for a maid who arrived pale and wide-eyed. "Pack. Everything." "But, my lady—" "Everything." Lady Horatia had not spoken since leaving the drawing-room. She wandered the south corridor, murmuring to herself, as if reworking her memory of the Duchess. She couldn't have. She wouldn't have done less. Sir Julian, meanwhile, sought the Duke out in the study, desperate to restore order with law and logic. "We must consult with the peerage board. Clarify this matter before it spirals. You can't possibly be thinking of elevating her in any way." The Duke did not look up from his desk. "She is not seeking elevation." "Then what does she want?" He set down his pen. "Nothing you could understand." Later that evening, as dusk melted through the mullioned windows, Clara walked the gallery outside the Duchess's former chamber. She paused at the portrait that hung across from the door, the late Helena Marrow in full regalia, her eyes fierce, her lips poised between command and confession. "I knew you were kind," Clara whispered, "but I never knew you were brave." A rustle behind her. Mrs. Fenwick stood in the corridor, hands folded, her voice rough with age. She used to stand there, too, looking at the portrait. Most people couldn't bear it, but she did, said it reminded her that even power can ache. Clara turned. "Did you know?" "I suspected," the older woman said gently. "She watched you the way a mother watches when no one must know she's watching." They stood together for a long moment in silence. Finally, Mrs. Fenwick placed something in Clara's hand. It was a second letter, the one sewn into the hem. "She wrote too," the housemaid said, "in case one was never read." Clara held it close, the linen still warm from where it had rested against her heart. Downstairs, the Duke sat alone in the library, the Duchess's last words echoing in his mind. Not the request, not the appeal, but the line that still haunted him. Protect her, not with name, with truth. He closed his eyes. He could do that much. Upstairs, Clara opened the second letter with careful fingers. And this one was not to the Duke. It was to her. "My dearest girl, if you are reading this, it means the world has turned. Forgive me." She read on, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. In the end, she did not cry for what had been taken. She cried for what had been given and never spoken, until now. The following morning, Clara Hollow did not descend the servants' stairs. She did not don her gray uniform. She did not polish silver or light the parlor lamps. Instead, she walked quietly to the east wing, where the Duchess's rooms had long remained sealed, and opened the door with the key left in her second letter. No one saw her enter. No one stopped her. Inside, the air was undisturbed, like a breath held in glass. The furniture was draped in dust cloths. The perfume long faded from the cushions. But everything remained exactly as it had been the morning Lady Helena last sat at her vanity. Clara moved with gentle reverence, removing the coverings one by one. First the writing desk, then the shades, then the oval mirror with its curling gilt frame. She opened the wardrobe and found 2 gowns wrapped in protective linen, and beneath them, A small carved box with a silver lock. The key from the letter fit perfectly. Inside were ribbons, a rosary, a tiny pair of gloves, child-sized, never worn, and tucked beneath them, a document folded so many times its corners had worn soft. It was a record of placement, signed by Lady Helena, delivered to a private matron in York, and dated 9 months after a documented illness. The name listed for the child, Clara Hollow. Not border scandal, not illegitimate, not erased, just hidden. Downstairs, the household stirred with uncertainty. Orders were given, then withdrawn. Guests who had lingered in the hopes of alliance or reconciliation packed their trunks. Lady Agatha had left before sunrise, her carriage wheels shrieking over the gravel, a trail of disdain in her wake. In the great hall, the Duke stood at the base of the staircase, speaking with Mr. Alden in low tones. He wore his mourning coat again, not for appearance, but for something older, heavier, perhaps the death of illusion, or the burial of silence. When Clara descended the stairs, wearing one of the Duchess's simpler day gowns, soft dove blue with pearl buttons, the room fell into a hush. She moved like watered-down stone, calm, deliberate, impossible to stop. The footmen straightened instinctively. The maids parted. Even the housekeeper stood aside, hands wringing her apron in helpless uncertainty. Mr. Alden stepped forward. "Miss Hollow," he said, offering a small bow. She returned it with a quiet nod. The Duke looked up, and for the first time, his eyes did not search for recognition in hers. They found it. "You came?" he said simply. "I was already here," Clara replied. "You just hadn't seen me." He held out a folded paper. "This was signed this morning. It designates you as steward of the Duchess's private estate in Wiltshire, legally separate from the ducal holdings. She had the deed altered 5 years ago. She intended it for you." Clara took the paper. "And if I refuse it? Then I will keep it safe, until you change your mind." She did not answer. Instead, she turned slowly, facing a household that had watched her walk invisible for 4 years. She did not demand a title. She did not ask for acknowledgement. She simply stood, still, and the silence bowed to her. Later, as she passed to the main doors of Hawthorne Hall, neither escorted nor exiled, a small group of staff followed to see her off, not out of obligation, out of something else. Mrs. Fenwick offered her a small velvet pouch. "The Duchess's brooch," she said. "She would have wanted you to have it." Clara took it with a soft, "Thank you." A carriage waited at the gates, not the ducal one. A simple, dark coach hired quietly by Mr. Alden. Clara stepped inside, but before the door closed, the Duke approached once more. "I will not stop you," he said, "but I will ask why now?" Clara held his gaze. "Because staying in a house where I was never heard is not victory. Leaving it on my terms is—" The Duke inclined his head. "Then go, Miss Hollow." She paused. Then, with a faint smile, "Clara will do—" The carriage door shut with a soft thud. Wheels turned, and as she passed beneath the great arch of Hawthorne Hall, once the threshold of life and service, Clara did not look back. She was not fleeing. She was reclaiming what had always belonged to her. Silence no longer. By week's end, Hawthorne Hall had shed its revelry like a serpent molts old skin. The florist no longer arrived at dawn. The ballroom stood empty, save for a forgotten earring glinting near the far wall. Even the clock in the west corridor, which had ticked relentlessly through 4 generations, fell silent, its winding key mysteriously missing. The servants, once bustling with invisible purpose, moved with quieter rhythm, not out of laziness, but out of uncertainty. Something in the very stones of the estate had shifted. Clara Hollow's name was no longer spoken in the kitchens, not in gossip, not in admiration, not even in warning. The silence was not cruel, it was reverent, as though speaking her name might summon the truth too boldly, as though it belonged now to another realm. In the guest registers, her entry remained unchanged, parlor maid, east wing, for years. But her chamber had been emptied. No one took her place. The bed remained made, the room untouched. Upstairs, the Duke of Merrow sat in the library more often than before. He took no new visitors, returned no invitations. Lady Agatha's final letter, written in a hasty, uneven hand, was returned unopened. Lady Horatia sent a second, more measured note suggesting some reconsideration of domestic arrangement. It was burned. In the drawing room, the letter from the Duchess remained locked away, now stored in a glass case in the Duke's private study, unseen by most, unread by all but three. It had not been sent to Parliament. It had not been copied. Its truth was not made public, but neither was it buried. Mr. Alden made the necessary legal motions discreetly. The Wiltshire estate, once considered a minor holding, was formally transferred to Clara Hollow. She did not return correspondence, nor did she issue notice of relocation. Only once, Alden received a short letter. It read, "The roses bloom late here, but they bloom." In Wiltshire, the estate was modest but elegant, a place of hedgerows, climbing ivy, and meadows that bent gently to the wind. Clara made no grand changes. The staff remained. The portraits were untouched. She walked the halls with quiet dignity, speaking little, observing much. She did not call herself Miss Hollow in front of the villagers, but she did not correct them when they called her Lady Clara. Back at Hawthorne Hall, a new painting was hung in the upstairs corridor, not in the gallery, where dukes and duchesses watched from gilded frames, but opposite the east wing, just beyond the duchess's chamber. It was a small canvas, simple, a young girl arranging violets in a white vase. There was no name inscribed beneath it, but every servant who passed knew, and the Duke, when he paused before it, would sometimes touch the corner of the frame, as if recalling something long unsaid. The house moved on. Letters continued. Balls were planned. But something remained, an absence that carried weight, like a piano note never struck. Guests who returned that season noticed it. A stillness in the air, a name that hovered but was never offered. And when they asked the staff, whatever became of that maid, the quiet one, Clara, was it? The servants only looked at them, then turned away, as though some truths were not for retelling, only for remembering. Years passed. The ivy climbed higher over the stone arches of Hawthorne Hall, softening its proud edges with time. The rooms within remained ordered, but quieter, less ceremonial, more lived in. The great chandelier in the ballroom gathered dust between dances, and the polished floors bore fewer footprints than before. But her presence remained, not as a scandal, not as a ghost, as a memory. The housekeeper still folded the linen in the east wing with particular care. Mrs. Fenwick, though aged and near blind now, continued to leave a single violet on the sill of the Duchess's old chamber every April. And in the library, the Duke of Merrow, his hair now silvered, his shoulders a little bowed, kept a worn blue ribbon tucked between the pages of Tristia. He had not remarried, nor had he explained why. The village near the Wiltshire estate knew a quiet mistress with dark eyes and an unreadable smile. She hosted no grand dinners, but gave small gatherings for local widows and orphans. She walked often, rarely spoke of her past, and kept a garden of roses and violets blooming well past their season. Children called her Lady Clara. She never corrected them. Once, when a traveling painter visited the village to sketch landscapes, he asked to paint her portrait. She declined. Instead, she handed him a pressed bluebell and a glass locket and said, "Paint that. It tells more of me than my face ever could." The painting now hangs in the village hall, and signed. At Hawthorne Hall, every spring, a parcel arrives without a note, a box of dried violets, wrapped in old linen. The Duke receives it without ceremony. He places it in the top drawer of his desk, and though he never speaks of it, the household watches. They know, on rare occasions, guests still ask about the events of that long-ago summer. Whatever became of her? They say, meaning the girl they once ignored. The servants offer no stories. The villagers smile gently and change the subject. The Duke only lifts his gaze and says nothing. But when he walks the garden paths, now mostly alone, he often pauses at the east-facing hedge where the Duchess once stood in thought, where Clara once watered blooms that were never hers. He places a hand on the branch, just once, and leaves a single bluebell. There is no plaque, no title, no fanfare, only a shift in the air when her name is nearly spoken and then swallowed by time. But in the eastern wing, when the wind moves just right, a door creaks softly, as if the house, too, remembers. And still, no one dare mention her name again. But every room remembered her,